If you look at a satellite image of the United States and you zoom in on the state of Texas, you will see something baffling. The state is literally split in two. The eastern half, the part that borders Louisiana and Arkansas, is a deep, rich green. It looks wet, lush, and forested. Then, as your eye moves west, you hit an invisible line. The green vanishes and is replaced by a vast expanse of brown and tan. The land becomes dry, barren, and empty. Now, look at a population map of Texas. The two images are almost identical. All the people, all the light, is crammed into the eastern half. You'll see a massive, glowing cluster of cities: Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. This is famously called the Texas Triangle, and it's one of the fastest growing regions on the entire continent. Over 70% of the state's population lives inside this corner. In fact, this relatively small area is home to roughly 22 million people and generates more than 75% of the state's GDP. The other half of the state, the brown, dry part that's geographically much bigger, is almost completely empty. It's a vast, dark void on the population map. To put it in perspective, East Texas has a population density similar to many East Coast states, while some counties in West Texas, like Loving County, have a population density of just 0.1 people per square mile. In fact, the 2020 census recorded only 64 permanent residents in the entire county. This isn't a political line. You won't see a sign on the highway. It's an invisible line that for centuries has decided where millions of people can live, where cities can rise, and where an entire economy can be built. This is the story of the two-faced state, and why one side of Texas is booming while the other remains one of the emptiest places in America. Geography. To understand Texas, you have to understand two things: the Gulf of Mexico and an imaginary line on the map. First, the Gulf of Mexico. You can think of it as a giant, hot bathtub. It is a massive oceanic basin, roughly 1,500 kilometers, 930 miles wide, with a surface area of about 1.6 million square kilometers, 620,000 square miles. It holds roughly 2.4 million cubic kilometers, 580,000 cubic miles of water. All day, every day, water evaporates off its surface. The main weather patterns blow from the southeast to the northwest, picking up that wet air and carrying it inland over Texas. This is why East Texas is so green. It's the first place that moisture hits. Cities like Houston and Beaumont are humid and subtropical. Beaumont, with a population of 115,282, receives the most rainfall in the state, more than 65 inches, 1,700 millimeters annually. Houston, a massive city of 2.3 million people, as of the 2020 census, averages about 49.8 inches, 1,260 millimeters of rain a year. This massive, constant supply of water supports dense forests and feeds major rivers. Geographically and culturally, this part of Texas isn't the desert you see in movies. It's the deep south. It feels more like Louisiana or Mississippi. But that moisture doesn't last forever. As the wet air moves farther and farther inland, it drops more and more of its rain. By the time it travels a few hundred miles, it starts to run out of steam. This is where we meet the invisible wall. For over a century, as first noted by the explorer John Wesley Powell in the 1870s, geographers identified this as the 100th meridian west. It marks the boundary between the semi-arid climate to the west and the humid subtropical climates to the east. Historically, this was the line where rainfall dropped below 20 inches, 510 millimeters, the minimum needed for traditional farming. West of this meridian, raising livestock is much more economically important, and agriculture relies heavily on irrigation. Recent climate studies suggest this arid boundary has actually shifted eastward, closer to the 98th meridian, due to changing weather patterns. This line is like a climate cliff. When you are standing east of this line, you are in the humid, wet part of America, fed by the Gulf of Mexico. The moment you step west of that line, everything changes. The rainfall drops off a cliff from over 35 inches a year to under 20, and then to as little as 8.8 inches in a city like El Paso. The air becomes incredibly dry. The lush greenery of the east has long vanished, and the land transforms. This is where the Great Plains begin. This is West Texas. The land rises up onto a vast, flat plateau called the Llano Estacado. or the Staked Plains. It's between 3,000 and 5,000 feet above sea level, completely flat and utterly treeless due to the hard caprock layer that prevents deep root depths. Further west, you get into the true Chihuahuan Desert, a region of rugged, dry mountains and barren basins. This is the Basin and Range Province, a landscape of stark, beautiful, and harsh emptiness. This is the Texas of cowboys and deserts, but it's also a land that simply does not have the most important ingredient for life: water. This single geographic fact, the location of the 100th meridian and the limit of the Gulf's moisture, is the why. It creates a rain shadow where high mountain ranges block moisture from both the Pacific and the Gulf. It's the reason the state is divided. History simply followed the map that nature had already drawn. History. The story of how Texas was settled is a story of water. History follows geography. The first major wave of American settlers, the ones led by Stephen F. Austin in the 1820s, part of a group known as the Old 300 families, when this was still part of Mexico, weren't looking for deserts. They were looking for one thing: farmland. And not just any farmland. They were from the Deep South, and they wanted to grow the most profitable crop on earth at the time: cotton. Cotton is a very, very thirsty crop. It needs reliable water. So, where did they settle? They didn't go west of the 100th meridian. They went straight to the wet, green, eastern part. They founded their colonies along the banks of the big rivers, like the Brazos and the Colorado, where the soil was rich and the rain was plentiful. This set the entire pattern for Texas's future. East Texas became the westernmost edge of the Black Belt, the region of the American South defined by cotton plantations and the enslaved African Americans who were forced to work them. Harrison County, in East Texas, held the largest number of enslaved people in the state by 1860, though counties like Wharton had even higher percentages of enslaved residents. This cotton-based economy was brutal, but it was incredibly profitable. It built the first major economic centers and the first ports, like Galveston and Houston, which existed to ship that cotton to the rest of the world. For the entire 19th century, Texas meant East Texas. So what about the other half of the state? The dry, brown, empty West? For most of the 1800s, it was considered a worthless wasteland. Early maps called it the Great American Desert. Not only was it too dry to farm, but it was also incredibly dangerous. This was the heart of the Comancheria, the territory controlled by the Comanche. The Comanche were masters of this arid and semi-arid environment. They were a powerful horse-riding empire that violently resisted all attempts at settlement. For decades, West Texas was a forbidden land. That all changed after the Civil War. In the 1870s, specifically during the Red River War of 1874 to 1875, the U.S. Army waged a final, brutal war against the Comanche, forcing them onto reservations in Oklahoma. Suddenly, the land was open, but it was still a desert. You couldn't grow cotton or corn using traditional rain-fed methods. Because of the low rainfall, agriculture would eventually require heavy irrigation from underground sources like the Ogallala Aquifer to succeed. What could you do? You could raise cattle. Cattle don't need 50 inches of rain. They just need to eat the tough prairie grass that grows there naturally. This was the birth of the Great Texas Cattle Boom. This is where the image of the Texas cowboy comes from. Men on horses managing huge, unfenced herds across the vast Llano Estacado. But a cattle-based economy doesn't support a lot of people. You might have a ranch that's 500,000 acres, but it only takes a few dozen cowboys to run it. The famous XIT Ranch in the Texas Panhandle, for example, covered over 3 million acres, an area larger than the state of Connecticut, but was run by only about 150 cowboys. While livestock remains a major industry today, the economy was later transformed by a West Texas oil boom. The discovery of the Permian Basin turned the region into a global leader in petroleum and natural gas production. And in recent years, the landscape has changed again to include numerous wind turbines producing clean electricity. So the two paths of Texas were set. The east was built on cotton, which required lots of water and, tragically, lots of forced labor, leading to dense populations and big cities. The west was built on cattle, which required very little water and very few people, leading to a vast, open, and empty landscape. Population. This brings us to today. The patterns set by geography and history are now locked in place, and they explain the population map we see at night. The Texas Triangle in the east is booming because it has the one thing you need to build massive cities: water. The region is formed by the state's 4 main urban centers: Austin, Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio, connected by Interstate 45, Interstate 10, and Interstate 35. These cities have access to major rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, all fed by the reliable rainfall from the Gulf of Mexico. Consequently, the Texas Triangle is home to over half of the state's population. Because they had water and a head start from the cotton economy, they could diversify. Houston became the energy capital of the world, home to over 4,600 energy-related firms, a global hub for the oil and gas industry, with one of the busiest ports on the planet. Dallas, located at a critical crossroads, became a national center for transportation, logistics, and finance, boasting nearly 24 Fortune 500 company headquarters in its metropolitan area. Austin became the state capital, and later, a global technology hub, the Silicon Hills. San Antonio grew as a major military and tourism center. These cities have diverse 21st-century economies. In 2025, the population of the Texas Triangle reached nearly 23 million following rapid growth. They can support tens of millions of people, and more are arriving every day. In fact, in the next 40 years, the population of the Texas Triangle is projected to increase by more than 65%, or 10 million people. The region covers a massive 60,000 square miles and includes 66 counties, with Burleson County at its center. Now, look west, to the brown, empty half. The cattle ranching is still there, and it still doesn't employ many people. The landscape is dotted with tiny, shrinking towns that are hours apart from each other. The data shows that more than half of the 100-plus counties in this region are losing population. So why does anyone live in West Texas? The answer is really just 2 things: oil and a single, isolated river. The first exception is the Permian Basin. This is the area around the cities of Midland and Odessa. It just so happens that beneath this dry desert landscape lies one of the largest and richest oil and gas fields on planet Earth. Geologically, this area was once covered by the Delaware Sea during the Permian period, which left behind thick deposits of sedimentary rock. Data from 2018 indicated the basin was responsible for 20% of total U.S. crude oil production and 7% of its dry natural gas, though production has surged significantly due to technologies like hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. The population here exists primarily to pull that oil out of the ground. These cities serve as headquarters for oil production activities. The economy is not diverse. It is entirely dependent on this one resource. When the price of oil is high, they boom. When it's low, they bust. Without the oil, the economic driver of Midland and Odessa would disappear. The only other real population center in the entire western half of the state is El Paso. If you look at it on a map, El Paso is baffling. It's a major city of 678,815 people as of the 2020 census, but it is hundreds of miles from any other Texas city. It is closer to Phoenix, Arizona, 430 miles away, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, than it is to its own state capital, Austin, 528 miles away. El Paso is the exception that proves the rule. It's not in the desert because it likes the desert. It's there because it has its own separate water source, the Rio Grande. El Paso is a classic desert river city. It survives by drawing life from the river that cuts through the Rio Grande Rift. Geographically and culturally, El Paso has very little to do with East Texas. It is more connected to New Mexico and its sister city, Ciudad Juarez, in Mexico. Together, they form the Paso del Norte, or Borderplex, a massive cross-border metroplex of 2.7 million people, with the largest bilingual and binational workforce in the Western Hemisphere. The city is distinct demographically as well, being 81% Hispanic, making it the largest city in the U.S. with an absolute Hispanic majority throughout its history. Outside of the oil patch and this one river city, West Texas is largely empty. The large-scale agriculture around cities like Lubbock relies heavily on irrigation from underground sources. Farmers pump from the Ogallala Aquifer, a giant, ancient underground lake. However, El Paso has had to diversify its water strategy beyond just the river. The city sits atop the Hueco Bolson Aquifer, and has built the K. Bailey Hutchison desalination plant, which takes brackish, salty groundwater and treats it to make it drinkable, as a way to survive as fresh water supplies tighten. This is the final reality of the two-faced state. The East was given a gift from the Gulf of Mexico, a sustainable source of water that has allowed it to build a massive, modern, and growing civilization. The West was given a beautiful, harsh, and dry land. Its only major resources, oil and fossil water, are temporary. They are being used up. In the end, a story of Texas isn't one story, it's two. It's a story of a wet, green, crowded East and a dry, brown, empty West. And the two are divided, now and forever, by that simple, invisible wall of nature.